You think your Twitter feed is a wild place?
Well, imagine a world where the walls themselves were the news feed, documenting everything from high poetry to passive-aggressive neighborly disputes.
Yeah, that's exactly what Pompeii was. See, when Mount Vesuvius erupted back in 79 CE, it didn't just destroy the city. It flash froze thousands of these public posts for us to read today.
What we're talking about here is the graffiti of Pompeii. And yeah, it was basically the original social media. And look, this wasn't just mindless vandalism, no way. It was this incredibly sophisticated, multi-layered way of communicating that everyone was using, from elite politicians all the way down to the working class.
Okay, so to really get what was happening in Pompeii, you kind of have to unlearn our whole modern idea that graffiti is lowbrow.
I mean, seriously, forget the modern view of it as a crime done in the shadows. In Pompeii, it was the total opposite. Writing on a wall wasn't hidden or illegal. It was the public forum. It was how you communicated, how you built status. It was a vital part of the city's daily conversation. And wow, what a conversation it was. We're talking about everything from, deep-seated romantic desires and high poetry, all the way to petty neighborly disputes and even warnings about street hygiene. The walls literally held all the neighborhood's business right out there in broad daylight.
But okay, this public forum wasn't just for gossip and neighborhood drama. It was also the perfect stage for what you might call the ancient influencer flex. It was all about proving you were part of the educated elite.
You see, the walls of just regular homes were covered in snippets from absolute literary heavyweights. We're talking poets like Virgil, Ovid, Propertius, and Ennius. These were the giants of Roman literature. I mean, in a society where literacy was this massive dividing line, knowing the elitist poetry, that was your verified badge. Seriously, if you could quote from the Aeneid, you weren't just writing on a wall. You were broadcasting that you were cultured and well-read.
It was kind of like, the ancient version of posting a photo of a super sophisticated book on your coffee table just for the aesthetic. A really public way of saying, yeah, I'm in the club. But the Romans didn't just quote the classics verbatim. Oh no, they loved a good remix. And down in the Basilica, we find one of the most clever and honestly biting examples of this whole thing.
Now, you gotta understand, the Basilica was not just some ordinary building. This was the city's legal and business hub. So think of it like a mashup of Wall Street and the Supreme Court. And it's right here that someone decided to play DJ with some of the most famous poetry of the day. So what they did was they took these famous lines from the poets Ovid and Propertius. Lines about deaf doors that won't open for a desperate lover, and lines about mercenary lovers who are only in it for the money. And they just mashed them together to create a totally new message.
So you can see what's happening here, right? They're taking high art, these famous love poems, and completely repurposing them. It's basically an ancient diss track aimed squarely at the 1% of Pompeii, a bitter commentary on how the doors of justice and commerce only seem to open for the rich.
And that right there just brilliantly illustrates their method, taking the highest form of art and turning it into a weapon to complain about the lowest form of greed. A pretty timeless message, don't you think? Just frozen on a 2,000-year-old wall. All right, let's move right into phase 2, the working class and celebrity. We're going to drop instantly into the grit of the ancient streets with something called the Fuller's Parody. Now, you might be tempted to think of the ancient working class as just silent labor, right? But they were actually incredibly sharp-witted critics. Consider this brilliant piece of wordplay. So Virgil's sweeping epic, the Aeneid, famously begins with the line, Arma virum cano, I sing of arms in the man. It is literally the absolute pinnacle of Roman high culture. Yet, right outside the laundry shop of a guy named Fabius Ululitermalis, a local worker scratched a direct and honestly hilarious response. They wrote, Fulones ululon cano, not arma virum cano. I sing the fullers and the screech owl, not arms in the man. It's amazing, isn't it? By changing just a few specific words, this worker consciously chose the grit and soap of the laundry over the blood and glory of legendary war. They found real humor in the mundane reality of their daily jobs, perfectly willing to mock the untouchable legends of heroes. And, this brilliantly illustrates a much broader point about how everyday people communicated back then. Even the very way they wrote on these walls showed off a really high level of interactive literacy. They used what is known as a technopandion. Basically, this is a 2,000-year-old art game where the text itself is visually arranged to actually mimic its subject. Think of it as a form of ancient, interactive graphic design. Reading a wall wasn't just some passive activity where you stand there and stare at words. It was intentionally designed to impress and physically engage you as you were walking by on the street.
We actually see this interactive literacy perfectly encapsulated in a piece reference as CIL 4-1595, which is often just called the snake poem. Take a look at how the Latin text curves and twists directly into the physical shape of a coiled serpent. This wasn't just some poem scribbled in a rush. It was a deliberate visual puzzle. To actually read it, you couldn't just stand there perfectly still. You literally had to physically move your head or twist your oil lamp around in the dark, tracking the curves of the snake across the plaster. It forced an engaging physical interaction with the wall itself just to extract the meaning of the words. It's an experience that modern scrolling only dreams of achieving.
So the crucial takeaway here is that these walls were platforms for all kinds of dynamic public expression. And that brings us to an entirely different kind of street-level obsession. Let's talk about the rockstar gladiators. When we look at the barracks walls, we constantly see terms like suspirium puellarum, which translates to the deep breath, or basically the heartthrob of the girls.
Actually, a fighter named Silatus claimed this exact title for himself right there in the graffiti. These men were the professional, high-stakes athletes of their age. If you want to understand their popularity, well, you just have to look at the plaster. Their massive influence was literally measured in the sheer volume of physical wall scratches left behind by groups of adoring fans. It was their ancient version of a follower count. But, okay, here is the absolutely fascinating paradox of their existence. Under Roman law, gladiators fell into the category of infamia. That meant they were completely marginalized outcasts sitting at the absolute bottom of the legal system. No legal protections, no standing, and absolutely no voice in a court of law. Yet right alongside that grim legal reality, we see their social reality, massive, unparalleled celebrity. So they were technically stripped of all rights, right? Yet their names were the most screamed in the roaring arena, and by far the most fiercely written across the city walls. They were, without a doubt, the most famous nobodies in the entire empire. The barracks walls are just absolutely covered in what we today would call fan art and detailed player statistics. Another fighter, a guy named Crescens, openly boasted about his immense popularity with what he called the morning crowd. You'd see fans meticulously scratching the dates of their favorite gladiators' victories and passionately arguing over the specific weapons they used. But we have to pull back and look at the bigger picture here. To the Roman elite, a gladiator was both a sex symbol and a highly effective political tool. The wealthy political class actively bankrolled these extravagant, bloody games as bread and circuses. It was a highly calculated strategy to keep the massive, restless mob entirely distracted, much like modern stadium distractions are meant to bury the news cycle today. Which brings us to this final, punchy realization for this part of the explainer. As long as the citizens were passionately arguing in the streets over who was the better, Thrax or Marmillo, the different factions of gladiators, they were completely occupied. Because if they are arguing about the arena, they certainly aren't complaining about the skyrocketing price of grain or the deep-seated corruption happening right inside the Senate.
Just like modern comment sections, people actually responded to each other. We're looking at ancient trolls and threads, the social media of Pompeii. So imagine walking into a grand Roman estate, right? In the House of Lovers, someone actually wrote this: "Lovers, like bees, make life as sweet as honey." It's just this beautiful poetic thought left right out there for the whole world to see. But of course, the ancient world had trolls too. A second person, who was clearly having a pretty bad day, wrote right underneath it in a totally different hand, "I wish." It's brilliant, isn't it? It is literally the original mood comment, just preserved in stone for millennia. And naturally, we've got to have some public shaming. On busy street corners, locals painted the phrase "Cacator cave malum," which translates to "shitter beware the evil." Basically, it was the ultimate neighborhood watch warning just to keep their streets clean. These signs warned that if you, fouled the footpath, you'd have to deal with an incredibly angry Jupiter throwing lightning bolts at you. They literally weaponized the king of the gods just to stop people from littering. Absolutely wild. What's really amazing to me is that the Romans were even self-aware about their graffiti addiction. They knew it was getting way out of hand. There's this one witty couplet that says, "I'm amazed, wall, that you haven't fallen down in ruins since you bear the tedious outpourings of so many writers." I mean, come on, that is ancient self-deprecation at its finest.
But listen, these walls weren't just for jokes and complaints. Perhaps the most fascinating post we found is one that actually gives a voice to the marginalized. In a small house in Region 9, archaeologists found a 7-line poem. It's cataloged as CIL 4.5296. Now that catalog number just implies it's an officially recorded artifact, right? But what it actually says is incredible.
This is arguably the only female-authored homoerotic love poem to survive from the entire Roman world. It completely subverts all the traditional tropes of the era. It's this incredibly powerful assertion of agency, just hidden away for 2,000 years, waiting for someone to read it.
So the next time you're online and you post a snarky reply, remember, you are following a tradition that is literally older than the empire. Seriously, keep that in mind the next time you leave a comment on a digital thread.
Ultimately, the walls of Pompeii prove that while our technology changes, that fundamental human urge to be seen and to be heard, it's eternal. So it really begs the question, what will your digital graffiti say about you in 2,000 years?
Oh, there are so many yummy vegetarian options out there. You could try like lentil soup, veggie burgers, tofu stir fry. The possibilities are endless.